Once everyone had promise. Soon most began to feel cursed. A few want to start again where there was promise. Guess what this is called? When one man would hear something he already knew, he'd say, I knew that. And it worked so agreeably that he began saying it when he heard things that he didn't know. Not to be confused with the Marr postulate, but for a while, the man experienced a reoccurring nightmare. Well, it wasn't actually a nightmare inasmuch as he had it in the daytime while he was awake. And it wasn't really a bad dream, since he found it potentially informative. But, at any rate, it went like this. He pictured how one could get so involved in, thinking about, reflecting on, reading about, hearing about, and even finding ever more evidence supporting the propriety of one's own already formed opinion regarding the ultimate destination that one might finally settle for. A never-ending, still in the bus station, discussion of possible schedules, routes, and destinations. Please note that this is not so much a theoretical potential problem as it is a real one. And now some financial news. You can't fool the stomach and you can't fool the tongue, but you can fool the mind a lot, and then some. This is one of the more salient operational distinctions between man's physical and mental worlds. A distinction, in fact, that makes it possible to sit in an airport and believe that it's about the same thing as flying. And as whacked out weird as this can sound to routine would-be travelers, it is not a comment on some shortcoming or stupidity of man, but rather a technical recognition of his earthly superiority. As one legend has it, after the great cosmic force, the one handed with his hands, created this universe, it said to the conditions, henceforth, let things as they need be, be. And to man said, go forth and do what you got to do. If you mentally run with the herd, you'll end up running by their clock. One kid wanted to ask his mother and father why it is that with the ordinary, love is not love if it's not a struggle, but decided against it based on their own periodic ordinariness. So mused one man. If in your head thinking is as much a sport as action is in the body, then I want me on my team. Yeah. On one of the inhabited planets in another solar system, wild beasts are captured through an unusual method. All that's required is to get them to be serious. That's definitions time, I think. I know it is. Civilization, the mother of all mass hysterias. Okay, mass hallucinations. Local hiring practices. If life can make you feel guilty for being alive, then it's got you. For free, for nothing. Relationships. It's hard enough being one person without being two. Relationships. It's easy enough being two. The real trick is in being just one. Relationships. What a concept. What a word. Death. The ultimate memory improvement course. City social guide. Why annoy strangers when you have friends? Remember this. When you once go to the city, there is no turning back, and you can't return to whence you started. All that's possible, and just barely at that, is to move ever onward, on through the city and out the other side. Guess what this is called? An unexpected and discomforting, and thus useful and pleasing, distinction between those who know what this is and like it, and those who imagine they do and imagine they do, is that those who actually know what it is are the ones who know that it is not intended for everyone, and that those who have no interest in it are not amiss in any manner. Okay, put another way. It is and always has been, only those who do not understand what this is, who proclaim that everyone should be involved, and predict dire consequences for those who are not. Anything to which a man can be converted is not worth a real man's time. To some things a man cannot be converted, and this is one of them. Change and the constant resistance thereto, a poem.
Yeah.
Half the fights are with Luddites. I guess I'm going to keep that until some of you look it up and find out who they were. The sophisticated believe that they can improve themselves only through professional help. The religious believe only by climbing on the back of God, while the neurally alert know that there's no assistance possible from other humans and no backs on which to climb higher than their own. And even that fraught with iffiness. The two brothers and the other worlds. Two brothers once decided to visit another planet, and since somehow they knew how, they did. And once there, two things happened. One of the brothers wanted to stay, and the other one wanted to return home. Then two other things happened. One of them could, and one of them couldn't. And now one of two other things can occur. You can either believe this actually happened or not, or understand that it's intended as individual, internally pertinent information. The two brothers and the other worlds. Fact or fable, myth or reality. Once all info becomes pertinent, such questions become M. Educational news. The reason warriors don't go to school is that they have lost the distinction between info and sources of info. The progress of a herd cannot be measured in miles per hour or even in any meaningful distances, but only in lifetimes and entire generations, which is why a more alert and anxious individual is never satisfied with being a mere part thereof. Much past the hypothalamus, most people don't really give much of a damn. Some people just hide it better than others. Want to guess what they call this? When life talks, no one can listen. So life made man talk, and everyone listens. Whether they want to or not. I had lived that. If there was a university for neural knights, it would not have a hospital or counseling or crisis center. It would only admit those already well and well on the way. A totally inalterable distinction between the mythical quest and man's conventional forms of instructions and assistance. The physical cloistering of oneself, so common to visible mystics, is a simplistic metaphorical gesture for the above understanding. Hormones never lie, but neurons, in speaking for them, sometimes get confused. Even when street-level philosophers reach the little end of their little understanding, they're wont to start comparing the behaviors of men. Considered in some quarters proof for sure of comprehension depletion. Ordinary thinking told one guy, come on, give me a try. I'm only 18 calories. To properly encourage the citizenry and to correctly execute his duties, the mayor told them, you can struggle to be just as alert as you want to, but you're still going to die. They were all quite appreciative of this information. They were. Another ad lib. On earth are two types of warriors, wimpy warriors and real warriors. The same distinction in the same order as between the physical and the intellectual. And one guy said, I knew that. Energy saver. Protection against imaginary intruders requires extraordinary measures. Guess what this one is called? All right, I want to ad lib. Another way you can analyze man's mental landscape. What kind of newspaper would you have if you removed from it all letters to the editor, all op-ed pages, all bios of reporters, and all stories relating to the paper's own internal affairs? The sacred legend of one people teach. You can pee on a brick, you can piss on a wall, but not in the hall of the blind prince's ball. It goes on later to say that, still quoting again, no offense taken, no offense intended. Then the legend peeks out from behind the hand at his face to see if you're beef-witted enough to believe this. Moo. 3 ad-libs in one night. The Northern Knights Credo. No man is dumber than himself, unless, of course, he's 2 people. One hot summer afternoon, after they had perhaps had more than adequate margarita therapy, local conditions turned and said to life, "You know, humans are so stupid they'll listen to almost anything." And Life replied, "Hey, that goes double for me." It takes 2 to dance, only 1 to fall, which is why some take themselves to the ball. There are 2 ways that you can take being alive seriously. One is to believe that just being alive is indeed a serious matter, and the other, lesser known one, is to understand the first one and ignore it. You can always recognize the second type of serious man by the fact that he's not. Myth. Once you can think and speak and have thus left the silent Eden, you can either become a cow or a knight. Psst. Life wants most of you to be cows. And only knights care about what they want. Unless he does it, a man never knows what can be accomplished and joy is to be had by silently, stoically, and relentlessly pressing ever onward to some ne'er revealed goal. Outside those struggling, outside everyday life, there is no way to correctly measure, judge, or compare intelligence. After reading such terms as psychic to the stars and astrologer to kings, one man decided that if he ever did advertise, he'd list himself as mystic to the crotch. Or privately subtitle, committed to the core, relentless to the end. Man's primary hobby in life is talking about life. Local conditions on this one world had a procedure whereby just before it was about to kill someone, it'd make them serious. He had a brother on a neighboring planet who was a bit more kind-hearted and would kill people just before they were about to become serious. City life vis-a-vis the knight's life. If you don't know anything, act like you do. And if you do, act like you don't. The way that the really more conscious know that they're more conscious is by the fact that sometimes they're not. Erotic imagery reinvented. When they play with themselves in the dark, all men feel they're the same. Yet additional benefits of being blind and intellectually impotent, or at least sterile. Words. Words mean something only if local conditions decide that they do. Just then, and only then, no matter the later beliefs of you-know-who men. There was once an honest man who believed he was on a mission from God, but eventually had to admit that he was only off to deliver a pizza. Words. What a concept. What a name for words. The teacher said to the class, "Now repeat after me. Conditions don't cause problems. People do. Now wet your pants and go to lunch. M&Ms and depth perception. A definition. Laughter. The thin sugar shell surrounding the deep, rich center of reality. How local conditions keep from being totally overrun by man and jackals by lions. None are terminally drenched who rain down on others. The meteorologically hip, the above who comprehend, the futile carrying are spared of umbrellas, totally useless and inappropriate. The mentally hip immediately recognize all of this as practical info applicable to the flows of their own neural juices. On one world, the neural warriors had a private standard inscribed on their offensive shields, quoting, "From one sense of consciousness to another sense, and then another, and then another." The neurally refreshed measured time not by clocks, but by noise and lack of noise. Poetry in motion, unencumbered consciousness. The warrior's quest, the personal and total resurrection of oneself. Should we take the most obtuse first? Or are there any amongst us who could identify the most abstruse, obtuse, oblique, and just weird? How local conditions keep from being totally overrun by man and jackals by lions. None are terminally drenched who rain down on others. The meteorologically hip, the above who comprehend, the futile carrying are spared of umbrellas, totally useless and inappropriate. I guess it's easier to read, if you saw it all. It says that how local conditions, what appears to be the conditions of an ordinary man's life, how they keep from being totally overrun by man, which we are using some of the ideas that have always been extant in men's little brains. Originally, in the Western world, of men being afraid that they had offended God, and an extended version of that now being ecologists and other right-thinking contemporary people afraid that they are going to kill the planet, and probably got it in mortal pain right now, and they feel real bad about it. All right, so using that example, which ecologists are just one up to date amongst others, but now they are a great visible example of religious people. They just attend different meetings, and I don't know how much, well, they have to contribute 10% like the Western Church wants you to, but they got their own church now, and it's the same kind of fear that men, which is a form of, it's a hobby, it's a distraction, that we're going to offend, we're going to hurt, we're going to let down, disappoint someone outside of ourselves. Which, as always, I know life doesn't need me to do it, but God damn, you got to give credit where it's due. As long as you're worried about that you're going to let down and disappoint somebody out there. Even before you'd ever heard of God or was old enough to go to church or the temple, your parents said, "Don't disappoint me. Don't keep doing it on the floor and hitting your sister and throwing up your spinach. After all I've done for you." And you start learning, what they call it, the big G, Gorder, guilt. Yeah. That you start off, and that is part of the neural life of man. See, physically you cannot do it, in case you never thought about it. If you had a child who was a deaf mute, I guess it's got its own problems, but I'm going to tell you the big problem if you're an ordinary parent is you cannot make that little nipper feel guilty. The body, you cannot make a dog feel guilty. I know people, I've heard people say, well, look at him, he feels guilty. He's scared because every time he does it on the floor, you've been hitting him. And he now submits to you, but guilt, guilt only happens neurally. Men believe, back to where we were, that's kind of the beginning of religion. I was going to carry just through it's just a continuation of it, but feeling guilty that you're going to offend your parents, let them down. And that you're going to let God down, because pretty soon they sort of wear that one out. And by the time you learn to talk, whatever age, I don't know, from 3 until looking at somebody probably 12. I guess we should speak for ourselves. But somewhere after a few years, they kind of run that one in the ground. There's just only so much they can do, and then they sort of have to shift your attention. It's like you just get worn out with the same food, or perhaps with the same kind of stimuli. So there's only so guilty they run out of it. The repertoire is limited. And so then they transfer it to the church normally. Oh, your school will pick it up for a while. It's just a continuing process. They do not drop the ball. If people drop the ball on you, you're prone to end up psychotic or a criminal. That your parents sort of pass it around, that's part of society's job, and then they sort of pass it to the school. I know they tell you you've got to go to school because the state has a law. That's not why they want you in school. Well, I should let your parents speak for themselves. You're right. Shouldn't be taking all these liberties and assumptions. So the school takes over, society takes over, and more specifically, then the church takes over, of telling you that you are going to let God down. And then the ecologists, the humanists, but ecology now being the great visible, describable, they say we're going to let down. Forget all these ideas about God and your parents. They're nice people, or a good concept perhaps for children. But my God, look around. We're actually laying the planet down. They can almost bring tears to a civilized, educated person's eyes today, evidently. I don't think one should dwell on that a lot, but that you say the planet's almost crying. Look at this garbage. Look how we're cutting down trees. Look how we're replanting the wrong trees in the wrong place. And people say, I can almost hear the planet crying and moaning. Have mercy on me. It's another form of misdirected hubris, in the same way as believing that you can offend God. If you ever thought about it that way, I know it passes for being humility. Like I'm such a lowly person, I worry about it. I'm not like ordinary Philistines and sinners. I worry about offending God because I'm a humble, simple man of the soul. We used to, in the Middle Ages, and some of the mystical circuits, that was known as, I forget the exact Latin pronunciation, but it was something to do with bullshit. Think about that you're so humble, so concerned about harming and offending God. Could we all take a second? Would you like to think about it? That's humility. Nobody asked my opinion. I would say that's closer to insanity. That's the same kind of people that probably we should watch, because they could, being the immoral bastards they are, they might invent. They might come up with some AI that's actually smarter than they are. When that's possible, come think about it. I was going to say smarter than man, but smarter than they are, that might be possible. Well, anyway, it's the same sort of thing. You know this. I've made enough jokes about that we're going to harm the planet. That doesn't mean that you have to enjoy seeing garbage on the highway and etc. But anyone who believes that humanity, by these landfills. But if you ever worry about that I exaggerate, or maybe you do now, you think that perhaps you overdo the density of man's intelligence. Besides me pointing out reality, we now have that little thing, they go up and they go up and they take photographs of the earth. They can't see landfills, they can't see polluted rivers, they can just barely make out that there's humans on the planet. And in spite of that, the up-to-date people, they go, any minute now, we're just, that in spite of the fact that just overnight, just out of nowhere, suddenly you pick up the paper and it says, in India, 4,000 people killed in 5 minutes from a typhoon. And it just went through and was gone, and no voice from God or anything like, oops, sorry. Plenty of historical evidence, volcanoes just suddenly go, and a whole civilization's gone. Right, you know. Poor old Mother Earth. But you notice it's that same kind, and it's not just stupidity. I keep saying the hubris. I'm just showing again how life misdirects the intellect in a certain way. But more specifically tonight, I was trying to get you to see, it misdirects it that you're going to let somebody down or something down. You're going to be a disappointment to something external, which is another way, or ultimately, I can say the difference between this sort of activity, whether you do it yourself and ordinary religion or would-be mysticism or reading about strange things. If you're not doing it, it's always out there. And it does no good to keep talking about it because somebody can't say, well, all right, if you say so, or that sounds metaphorical enough that, by God, I believe it. You can say that, but so what? So you just fell for it again. If you say, well, I believe you. Well, you can either that or not believe me. Same thing. You're on the same level. At any rate, there is this feeling that we're going to let somebody down, or if you want to look at a slightly different twist on it, that we're being exhorted on, but it's always from some external source. And it's not, again, it is not something easily to be ridiculed or critiqued, because contrary, the intelligent, ordinary people can take the opposing position and make the one I just enunciated appear to be crippled, because they can say, well, we've got to look externally. Not just religion, but anything. Education, I'll buy that. Go ahead with education. And they can prove it. Just think about it a second. It's just, to naysay it would be a de facto admission of insanity. If I say, well, education, that just shows how dumb you are. That you go out to somebody else to get an education. And somebody would think, you mean that it's proving I'm stupid that I made such scores that I got a full scholarship to Harvard? I mean, some of the greatest minds of our generation were teaching when I was privileged to be there. And you're saying that it proved my stupidity, I had to go get educated from, where else are you going to get education? See? I still stand by it. It's the same thing that all of my help comes, the religious used to say, my help cometh from the Lord, or my help cometh from above, I think the Muslims say. But it's always my help cometh from somewhere. And of course, if your help cometh from there, then your reprimands can come from there. You know? Well, it's you and your dog. You can say, good boy. And then a few minutes later you can go, what'd you say? What were you looking at me like that for? Or you can say, bad boy. It's up to you. And you can say, well, let me educate you. Let me help you. The feeling is that there is some sort of conflict and that we're in a lesser position to life. They used to be known as gods. It can be known as one's own now subconscious, which is, I don't know whether it's losing that much power, but it's always something. How about that? Let me be technical. It's always something out there. It's either the planet, the earth, spirits, gods. And as strange as this one sounded after reading it twice, I'll try it again. How local conditions keep from being totally overrun by man and jackals by lions. The title does mean something. That's just a title. That this has to do with what we're talking about. I just tried to give you another view of it. See, the title is in effect kind of satirical. You understand? I'm sort of putting you on the mind to go, how local conditions keep from being overrun. Local conditions, you can say how God, which is ordinary people's local condition, how the planet, that's the ecologist is God, but how our external conditions keep from just being overwhelmed, just ruined by man. And jackals, the same by lions. Do you want me to say that was in parentheses? Will that help? But how local conditions, how everything outside of you, which is what local conditions are, that's the immediate external world, is local conditions. How they keep from being just totally overrun, ruined, priced out, overwhelmed, overworked, done in by man. I mean, hell, they got to protect themselves. And jackals by lions. Then, after that title, the body of the work is somewhat shorter than the title. I believe, character-wise, letter-wise, but it goes like this. None are terminally drenched, you understand, like downpours. None are terminally drenched who rain down on others. Now, that's not the point to be rhetorically clever, but as some of you may have already guessed, in rain down here, it's spelled R-E-I-G-N. But either way, see, it works. That you are not totally, or not terminally drenched as long as you rain down on somebody else. That's where the jackals and lions come in. Because at a simplistic sequential level, if you took the title and now everything I've said, an ordinary mind could hear, wait a minute, jackals are completely overrun by lions. You've never heard of a lion being eaten by a jackal? Nope. I've heard of other things that run like a maniac when they see a jackal. Jackals are not something that just decent gazelles and other animals invite over to a dinner party. It's just where you're used to seeing or thinking about jackals or almost anything being prey to a lion, which almost anything is except, I guess, an elephant and a tank and an insurance salesman. Jackals rain down on somebody. Jackals are not at the bottom of the food chain. It's just the reason I threw it in to get your attention now, or go ahead and do it for you, is how local conditions, back to the title, keep from being totally overrun by man and jackals by lions. There's no doubt the last part, well, lions do absolutely overrun jackals. If you're going to take the last part of the title and stick it on the and pose it on the first part, you'd say, then the title you'd think really fails, because then you'd say how jackals keep from being totally overrun by lions. Well, they don't. That's the title. The body says none are terminally drenched who rain down on others. As long as you're not at the bottom of the food chain, and no one is, you are not totally overrun. Now, we got that? Physically, everyone, you can get that. Now back to the more expanded in-person version I was doing. Any rational person that would go along and listen to that would hear just what I said and perhaps keep waiting. Well, what's the point? What's the point? Yeah, everything eats everything else. They would probably wish I hadn't said about there is no end to food chain, because they'd go, wait a minute. We'll get that some other time. No, we won't, but I just said that to shut them up. It just proves where they are, by the way, on the food chain. In case you never thought about that, anybody that claims that there is a definite end to the food chain, in a sense, they're right. But due to my warm and charming nature, I will not address the matter further while they're in the house. It was an immediate, the title and body of the work was sort of a different version of what I'm talking about now, since I started talking about it. That apparently out here always has the undeniable, inescapable, but just undeniable ability at any time to overrun you. I mean, what the hell is God? What is nature? Aside from the ecologists having it backwards and going, wait a minute, don't start that again. Okay, I won't. It is that the external environment, that somebody's going to overrun you. The ecologists would want to switch around and say, well, it's our stupidity. It is our gross negligence. But you say, well, yours? And they go, oh, no, not mine. Well, in other words, we're not going to destroy the planet, mate. Well, we could, but it's not the planet out there making us destroy it. Well, that's what you get for some of you apparently following it for the first 30 minutes. Couldn't resist making it more interesting. As long as there is the feeling, the acceptance, which it is ordinary, it is sanity in the first stage, that external conditions, something external from you, and don't worry about the word, but something external to you will overwhelm you. And any sane person will say, well, certainly. If nothing else, death, age, weather. You just start naming it. You know, well, there's no end to it. Well, But if they would go for the physical part, the material part, when I described it in the sense that no one is totally overrun. That is, no one is absolutely at the bottom of the food chain. As long as they eat somebody else. Jackals can stand around and go, boy, the lions just got through working them over good and chasing them out of the mall and down the street and hooting at them and throwing rocks at their cars. And the jackals have to get it, themselves together. And let's say they are a bit chagrined for a while and look like, boy, are we ever going to be able to handle the lions? And they know they're not, but they probably have to do a little whistling in the dark. And a couple of them say, boy, if we'd stayed in longer, it's a good thing you held me back. I was going to take that one lion. That kind of stuff. They're having to make up for the fact that they know anytime that they dance with the lions, they know who's going to lead. Yeah. And they know they're going to be lucky to get out of the dance hall with part of their body left. Yeah. So they know that. But they are not totally overwhelmed on the basis that they can turn right around and here comes a ground squirrel, a prairie dog, another jackal. They're not real particular. And there's somebody they can rain down on. So you are not terminally drenched, not physically and not in the intellectual sense. You are not overwhelmed as long as you can overwhelm someone else. Now this. If anybody, an ordinary mind, should be able to follow that. Don't ask them why they would, but they should be able to follow it. Then if I do this and say, here, then it really goes into Looney Tune time. Because people feel absolutely they're overwhelmed. They might not use that term, but they're overwhelmed if you say, why don't you wise up? And they go, well, I'm going to school. I said, wise up. Hey, I'm going to a real school. I ain't going to one of those drugstore night law schools or some crap. I'm going to Harvard. Get smart. Well, I'm trying. It's jackals. You intellectually, anyone at the ordinary level to start with, they intellectually, and by that you should hear, if you're ordinary, spiritual, emotional, but spiritual is what would be mainly thought of as would be mystics, religious people, people who believe that they're on some sort of metaphysical quest. The whole idea of a quest implies, or just states, that it's something that you're seeking. And even if they tried to get real smart-ass on us and say, well, some of this I understand is metaphorical, they might say, I don't think you necessarily have to go out on a physical quest. I mean, like to Tibet or something. But the quest, it's something you're seeking. So there's the implication. Even if they said, well, I don't believe you actually have to go find somebody on the other side of the world, they're probably closer to home or in a book or something. But still the point is, they feel as though I am being rained down on. That if I am on some quest, it is out there. I mean, what is a quest? Who would think to use the word quest or search, but who would say, I'm going on a great quest, and they go in their room and you never see them again? It's always life knows what it's doing. If somebody did that, after you stayed in there a fair length of time, life would take care of you. They'd have the police, they'd get an order from a judge, they'd have you committed, they'd break down the door and put you away. I mean, that's proof you're nuts, that you said, I'm going on a great spiritual, if not intellectual quest. Goodbye, mother, goodbye, wife, children, and you go in a room and close the door and lock it. And stay there for weeks, months, years. I mean, there's proof. You're certifiably nuts. I mean, you said he was going on a quest. And where did he go? He went in his room and closed the door and locked it. You understand? It's just silly. So there's still the feel that I could be overwhelmed, I can be overrun, but then to turn it to where that does not sound as though that is a negative comment, that if there is something positive to be done, if there is some achievement to be made in life, it can only be done through assistance from where? Cleveland? No. A lot of asking. Out there. Yeah. Now, we will laughingly assume that some of you have thought it this far from the physical into just that part. Now what if we go just from internally into you, into your own brain, into your own mind, for those of you who still prefer the allegorical. Mind doesn't sound as messy as the brain. Plus a lot of people, not knowing it, they like to hear the word mind instead of brain because they think, well, your mind can be worked on. As a matter of fact, at very little cost. But the brain, you know how much neurosurgeons get? Some of them get more than good Mercedes mechanics nowadays. Plus, as I assume most of you know, according to all medical science, I'll just report it, that brain cells do not regenerate.
No.
So that if a surgeon is, neurosurgeon's working on your brain, not your mind. See, because you can work on your mind or your uncle can. Or a bartender can work on your mind. All they can do is, mislead you. Or you can get away later and think, well, hey, that's stupid. But let's say, instead of your mind, let's say that you let a neurosurgeon work on your brain, and he's doing long, and suddenly a good song comes on that he loves, like, hey, that's Three Dog Night. Or suddenly goes, ah! You understand? It's not like being able to patch up, like maybe he was operating on a bunion on your toe, a podiatrist, and accidentally slice your toe, they can sew it back on. Your brain, is... So people like the idea of the mind. But back to the brain. Or back to the mind. Which is why you have, amongst other things, back to the mind. Inside your mind, the whole idea of where it came from, of the subconscious, the unconscious, at another level, is where the whole idea of God's came from originally, part of it. But everyone talks to themselves. We've been through that in all kinds of ways. You can use your own version, but now you don't know anything if you do not know that something, for a while I called it talk to yourself. It's the noise, your thoughts. It's the noise that life makes going through you. So there's at least two people in you. There's you and life. There's you and you if you get good. There's your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. There's your carnal mind and your potentially spiritual mind. But if you know anything, you know that there's this continuing running potential. It seems as though you cannot focus your awareness except on one at a time. But just doing that, people don't normally think about it. It shows you got two. Yeah. If you can say, well, yeah, I can sometimes turn around and I realize that I'm still just fighting this fight with that guy I had the date wouldn't give my money back at Kmart, or that guy that bumped me in the parking lot. You're right. I'm sitting here trying to do my work, and I keep going, I told you which way you're going. He went, I go to hell. I told you which way you're going. I go to hell. It's either that or you're singing, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. Over and over, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. And trying to do brain surgery. So, I know it's a tricky thing, and with ordinary people, it really proves nothing. The bare bone fact of it, because they have to take it somewhere else and get it into the field of what is now considered to be academic psychology, if not religion, to excuse it away. But people do talk to themselves, and the proof being those who don't, those who say they don't, how do they know they don't?
Yeah. This.
If in other words, they say, well, I took what you said, and I've been watching, and I don't talk to myself, I think, but I watch myself. Well, who's watching? Inside of everybody's mind, or brain, but inside of your mind are two minds. Inside of every wire is two currents, AC and DC. Behind every great historical event and person are two persons, Punch and Judy. Once you understand that, then you're faced that, if we're going to look at it sequentially or spatially, we're getting now even into lower or to finer and finer macroscopic, macrocosms, subatomic levels that now we're faced with inside of your own mind. You have you, and you have the you that is apparently going to prey upon you. This is very often known inside of the privacy of one's own mind as guilt. Not the kind, I know it seemed to start somewhere else, but it's now inside of your own mind. You have a thought and you go, ooh. This is far beyond what psychology ever hoped for, but right quick, I'll give it to you. The you that had the thought, let's say some horrible thought. What have you called a horrible thought? The part of your mind that had the thought, but you caught it real quick. I mean, there it went again. You're imagining that you're doing so-and-so. I don't want to go into it, but maybe it has something to do with you and watermelons and half of the sub-team of some national hockey. I don't know. But you have it. There it is again, and you immediately feel bad about it. Okay? Here's something you'll never get, even at Harvard. The part of your mind that had the thought doesn't feel bad about it. Yeah. But again, if an ordinary person could hear this and in some way it had an effect on it, it would turn them into probably what would someone else would want to classify as a classic example of a schizophrenic. If they start going, wait a minute, you mean that every time I have a thought, then I have something, and it's me going, well, I like that thought or I don't like that thought, then it's actually another me that's, except me's kind of a hubernistic word again. The you that has naughty thoughts, the you that has thoughts you disapprove of, is not the same part of your mind that disapproves of them. This is beyond being incomprehensible to ordinary people. It's worse than this. If they heard it and comprehend the term, they go, well, so what? Because, I guess in psychology they use terms, and they have even in the church, but in psychology I know you've got to have, or the goal is, the ideal is to have a really good, relatively speaking, integrated personality, they used to call it. I know they meant other things included, but would be that's the whole point of working on yourself or undergoing talking analysis or whatever analysis you chose, is you're trying to in some way unify, try to bring together in a more combined, a more stable, that you're not doing things self-defeating. Well, they always end up behavior. In other words, that you would go into analysis perhaps to get off drugs. Of course, first off, as they say, you've got to want to get off drugs. And they can't drag a drunk off the street and force him into sobriety. They can lock him up, we can deal with behavior and lock him up until he gets sober and turn him loose, and you know where he's going. So they say, well, you got to want to change. They look at behavior. That, well, we can get a man off drugs if he wants to change, or we'll try to get him off drugs. They look at that as being some direct, that the man is now unified, at least he does not want this anymore, and he'll work on it. There is no place in ordinary thought, and I'm just using psychology as being the kind of civilized, recognized cache supposedly of psychological wisdom, or at least research. There's no place for them to see that an ordinary person, the psychiatrist sitting there, just a sane, a decent man making a great living, recognized, they do not see that he's taking notes, and maybe the patient, every time he lays on his couch, sweats and get this expensive couch wet. And so he's sitting there taking notes, working with this patient. He's been with her or him for years, and he looks down and he's sweating again. And the psychiatrist, having been through treatment himself, he looks down and goes, I wish he wouldn't do that, and then thinks, he can't help it, I shouldn't do that. And if we jumped in his brain right there in his mind, he could use that as proof that he is civilized, that he, even though he's not perfect, it shows he's trying to integrate his personality, his mind. He can say all he wants to, but he's not looking at it on the basis that it's two different minds thinking. He's thinking, well, I've got to stop that from doing it. And if I jumped in with all this crap in his brain right then, and I said, I told you to talk to yourself. He said, well, that's not talking to yourself. I realized through whatever reason, I don't know why, but there's obviously something in my past. Something makes me have an adverse either reaction to people who sweat, or maybe it's just because I'm so greedy. Maybe I'm too materialistic that I know how much I paid for this leather couch, and he keeps sweating, and I know it'll finally take some of the stain, but it's something I've got to work out. If there was actually something to work out with an ordinary person, which there's not, but I could save him a lot of money and say, well, first off, you got to admit, you got two minds. You're worried about the planet closing in on you. You're worried about somebody else raining down on you. Back to where we started. He'd go, no. He'd say, you're an amateur. You don't understand this. The mind that does something, any thought you have, let me make it real simple. Anything that you think up here. Now, we're not talking about from here down. Because as always, you've got to be fairly sane for this to have any benefit at all. From here down, you've got to be well. Relatively speaking. From here, you got to be well. If you're not, just screw it. You're done for. And I can't help it, you can't help it. Or if you're ordinary, you think you can help it, and if not, you can feel guilty by not being able to help it. It's a free hobby. Why am I so dumb? Why am I inclined to fall down and hurt myself? Why are my ears so big? It's a great hobby. If a person does not see that, let's go past the thought, the mind for idea of there being two minds, that the thoughts you have, people will say, well, the thoughts, they seem to happen, and they explain it all the way from the more simplistic and religious people say, well, Satan makes me think evil thoughts, or the evil force in the universe does. And then the more Sophisticated people say my subconscious mind does, past forgotten traumas, etc. But if you tried to put on them the idea that there is much potential, very useful information that you could approach on the basis that you have two minds going, and if you don't like that, on the basis that thoughts happen, and any comment you have about the thought is not from the thought. One more time I repeat, lest you think you're not hearing it all, from any ordinary view, that's just useless. Picking a word you want, it's insane, it's useless, it means nothing, that you don't know what to do with it at the ordinary level. But if you look at it back to the fact that your life at the intellectual level is a constant from the time that you can speak, which is, we'll say, the time that your intellect is actually fired up, there is a feeling all the way from being made to feel guilty. You're always having to answer to, respond to, fear, look for assistance out there. In the mind, you think that part of what's going on in your mind, at least half of it, well, most people, at least half of what they think, to varying degrees, they disapprove of. They don't like, or it's useless, it annoys me, I shouldn't do it. They do not see that it's the same relationship inside their own mind to them feeling like I've got to respond to something out here. Even those who might say, no, I'm past all that. My parents are dead, I had a good relationship with them, I did not feel guilty, or I got to the point that I no longer worried about what they thought, and plus I got way over religion, or perhaps I grew up in an atheistic household, I never had to worry with that crap. Doesn't matter. They can say, none of that applies to me. Anything in me that's not really what I approve of, I'm working on it. Do I have to do this and go?
Yeah.
Which I'm doing that for you. For them, they'd want to look back and go. You know? In other words, they don't understand that. Hey, that was it. At the ordinary level, the mind feels as though it is having to dance with somebody, either externally, or that they're having to dance with some kind of internal reaction that was caused by something in the past or something that reoccurs externally. That not only does all of my hope, all of my possible joy, all of my possible improvement rest with the Lord, that is, rest out there, so does all my possible condemnation, so does all my possible, the sources of any conflict that I have. That even though it's in my mind, you're right, it's things that bother me. See, there's some sort of neurosis I have, some sort of phobia or something a little more subtle. It's just that I think things about people, I'm hostile at certain people, and it's not good. I should be working on that. They do not see that it's the same relationship as jackals to lions, environmentalists to volcanoes. It is nothing that strange. It's just point blank, and everybody looks and goes, huh? Huh? Which is normally what you're supposed to do. Because as long as you look blank, staring is the comment. Staring is the wall. Staring is the dividing line. It was the progenitor of the Grand Canyon. The Great Divide, the Mississippi Basin, the Volga. That it is, well, wait a minute, let me think about this. Anytime you do that, it's still on the basis that there's something that, in other words, if I said something or somebody said something, somebody said just what I said, and somebody goes, well, wait a minute, now I'm interested in stuff like this, let me think about it. You're already doing it. The way that the ordinary mind survives, the way, back to put an additional final twist on the title, recall how local conditions keep from being totally overwhelmed by man and jackals by lions, which prima facie is ridiculous. It's got to be a joke. It's got to be some sort of metaphorical satire. How local conditions keep from being totally overwhelmed by man. How about how one part of your mind keeps from being totally overwhelmed by the other part of your mind? Yeah. That's because one part of your mind says, you can't do that to me. And then 2 seconds later, the mind does it again. Yeah, we're in a motel room with, no, I told you not to do that. All right, now we're in the motel room in 4 or 5, no! That's how you keep from being overwhelmed. That's how ordinary people believe, well, that's how ordinary people do keep their intellectual balance. They just don't see it. is they've got one foot mentally in here. That's the way they feel about it without knowing it. And the other foot apparently is out there. You're back to what still probably should sound to you as one of the best pictorial examples. You are now dealing again with the fish in the oceans, the fish in the waters, which that is just so physically, materially palatable that you should be able to see. We all know if a fish could think at all, just a little bit, and he started in some way having complaints about the water, you'd think, Jesus, here it is, the first fish that ever could think had a mind, and within 10 minutes, he's neurotic. He's deluded. You can't, you'd want to say fish. How? You could be trying to help him, being his intellectual superior. You could say, well, little fish. You just start thinking, and you cannot have complaints. I don't care what it appears to be or what kind of, maybe you got indigestion or I don't know what, but you can't have complaints about the water because literally, because that's easy to see, literally, the fish in the water, I know you can look and say they're two separate things, but insofar as operationally, insofar as functionally living, the fish, from the fish's view, without him knowing it, the fish in the water are what? Would inseparable be an overstatement? It's simple. You take a fish out of water and we're done for. You can discuss it all you want to. You can teach a little fish to pray, try to take its little fin and do a crucifix or something, or try and give it a little miniature version of something about Freud and dream interpretation. But by God, he better be able to read fast because that fish is a goner. He needs one thing. He needs his environment. They're inseparable. Now, looks at another quick way, we all know that we got to have oxygen, etc. Intellectually, people do not see it. And what is the difference functionally between a fish and the water? None. I know physically you can say they are two different things. But once that fish, if the fish is alive and healthy and functioning, operation of the fish in the water, he opens his gills, and there is really no place that the water begins and the fish begins. It just goes intellectually. That is man and the environment. But if ordinary man, I could not do it, nor would anybody, but if they saw that, the parade would stop. We would not have technology. We wouldn't be recording this. We wouldn't have clothes. We wouldn't be standing here. Because in a sense, the men do not in any way analyze it in this manner, but they are railing against the environment. Yeah. They are struggling against it. They're like fish going, God damn this water. I'm sick of it. See, that's not a comment on man's stupidity. It's again a technical notation of his earthly superiority. That in a sense he is stupid enough to do that. Which I already told you, stupid ain't the word. There is a word for it, but I have some consideration for other people's feelings, especially the stupid, because they're touchy. When you understand that your mind is an absolute, not metaphorical, but is an absolute physical, continual reflection of the feeling that a fish would have that the water is against me. Sometimes the waves blow against me. There's trash in the water. Other fish are too close. I don't like the water. I want to fly. All that's insane. In an operational sense, if you're trying to do something extraordinary inside yourself, not out there, not to please somebody, but you got to understand it's insane to think that what goes on in your mind is not a fish in the water swimming around, and that it's not you mentally continuing to resist you. You finding fault with you, and you say, well, I'm supposed to. That part of me, those thoughts I have, those bad thoughts, I should stop them. But the you doing that is not those thoughts. But it could be your finger.